Good morning. Can we all find a seat, please? And for those who are joining us virtually, I hope you've already found your seat. Or you can stand, no judgment. Thank you and good morning. To start off this year's Illinois Workforce Summit, it is my honor and my pleasure to welcome to the stage First Assistant Deputy Governor for Health and Human Services, Mr. Ryan Croak.
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, East Peoria. How's it going? Well, I know. How many people here are actually from Peoria or East Peoria? Raise your hand. All right, let's thank the locals. We appreciate you. We appreciate the hospitality service and the folks who are preparing the food and the beverages. They've done a great job. I had 8 cups of coffee already, and I really enjoyed it. My name's Ryan. I work for Governor Pritzker. I was really grateful to be with many of you last year to say hello, to share some thoughts, to help to kick things off. And I was asked by Director Ronnie Patrick from the Department of Human Services, Division of Rehab Services, to come back this year. And I said, why in the world would you want me to come back? They were tired of me last year. And she said, no, just come back. There will be some new people in the room. So how many of you, by a show of hands, are here for the first time and were not here? Oh, this is terrific. I'll say the same thing I did last year. That's great. I'm just going to do a couple more quick show of hands things because I want to know who's who in this zoo. Can you raise your hand if you consider yourself a Southern Illinoisan? Southern? Yes. All right. Southern Illinois, we love you. How about the Central Illinoisans? I'm one of them. Yep. All right. Woohoo. Very good. And let's say, I'm going to get a little complicated here. How many of you are from suburban Cook County? Yes. All right. I am a suburban Cook County transplant to Springfield, Illinois. I've been there for 20 years. I love the suburbs. It's great, and I'm glad to see everybody well. Now, what about the collar counties of Illinois? Anybody from Cook or DuPage, Lake? Woo! Yeah, Kendall. Okay, very good. Will, everybody's in the house. This is a truly statewide representation of folks, but I'm going to save the best for last. What about our people from the city of Chicago? Anybody from all right, there we go. Well, it's great that all of you are here. I know for many of you it's a sacrifice to travel and to invest in your professional development, but it's really cool to see so many folks of goodwill who are committed to the public interest and the common good, to workforce development, getting together for a little bit of time, concentrated with colleagues, to do better by the people that we're all here to serve. I want to thank you on behalf of Governor Pritzker. He is, as you know, really committed to strengthening the workforce in the state of Illinois. We're always open to new and better ideas, to copying ideas from other jurisdictions that are working well. So if you have ideas, don't be shy about sharing them with your colleagues, whether they're from the Division of Rehab Services at DHS, from the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, from the Illinois Community College Board. Our state government agencies are quite lucky indeed to be stocked with folks who are really smart and really devoted to the public interest, and they can only do their jobs well if they hear directly and candidly from all of you in this room in the time that you have together. I do also want to give a special shout out to the folks of state government, my colleagues in our state government. So if you're here on behalf of the Department of Human Services, the Illinois Community College Board, or the Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity, raise your hand. And how could I forget the Department of Employment Security, IDES? Raise your hand. Hey, is that Director Ray? Director Ray Marchiori, stand up, stand up. He is a great, stand up, special guy, very nice human being. very devoted public servant. He has served across multiple administrations of state government. He knows the employment security system inside and out. And he's just a real decent, hardworking guy. And we're lucky to have him at the helm of the Department of Employment Security. Ray Marchiori. I feel the same way about Director Ronnie Patrick, who leads the Division of Rehab Services. She's got a great Chief of Staff, Andy Lasasso. Andy, thank you for the warm introduction. I don't want to hold you up. I'm going to talk about one substantive thing that I think affects workforce development in the state that I just want to put on your radar. I won't go into the weeds. I'm not going to go into the nitty gritty and make you fall asleep and need to eat 3 more cinnamon rolls and have 6 more cups of coffee. I just want to talk about the governor's Build initiative. Part of workforce development, whether you're in central Illinois or southern Illinois or in the great city of Chicago or in one of our awesome suburbs, part of having a strong and healthy workforce is making sure that workers have a place to live that is affordable. How about that? A place to live, an affordable home. And the Build initiative is super important. How many of you have heard of it? It's okay if you've never heard of it. What? Build? What's that? I don't know. Okay, a few of you have. Build is designed to expand and accelerate the availability of homes for working class families in Illinois. As you may know, there is a tremendous shortage of accessible, affordable housing in many of our cities. How many of you are from McLean County, Bloomington Normal area? Okay, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Housing is a real issue. Anybody from Rockford? Yeah, my Rockford people. You guys have like a crew. I love it. And you're all together. That's very special. Winnebago County. Okay. In places like Bloomington Normal and in Rockford and in many cities in between, there is a dearth, D-E-A-R-T-H, a dearth of affordable homes for working people. And in places like Bloomington Normal, where you have the Rivian car plant, which you know about, does anybody know what Rivian is? Rivian is a car plant that they're an electric vehicle manufacturer. They took over the old Mitsubishi auto manufacturing plant, which had been dormant for over a decade. And now at Rivian in Bloomington Normal, there are thousands of workers earning good wages, and many of them have to travel a long ways in order to get to work because there just aren't enough housing options in McLean County. Now, it's in a way a great problem to have. You know, people are working, they're earning a good wage, they're doing meaningful income generation to support their families. We want Illinois to be the best the best state in the country to raise a family. But you can't do that if you don't have access to an affordable home near the place where you live. So I know that this is a little bit distant from the items in your agenda today, but I just wanted to put it on your radar because I know that you're all concerned public citizens. Your neighbors, your friends, your family, they all rely on affordable housing stock, and I want to put the Build initiative on your radar. The governor talked about it in the State of the State address. We're working hard in the General Assembly right now to make sure that every legislator and every person in the Capitol building is aware. What we want to do is break down barriers to housing development. That means if you have a place, you have a property and you want to put an accessory dwelling unit on it, that there should be fewer barriers to making that happen. If you're a developer and you want to build a duplex or a triplex, that there should be less red tape associated with getting that built in your neighborhood. That doesn't mean shortcutting or short-circuiting reasonable neighborhood concerns or the concerns of your city council or your mayor, but it does mean making Illinois a more friendly state for those who want to build homes for people who are working. They get up every morning, they want to support their family, and in order to do that, they need a place to live. They don't want to drive an hour to get to the Rivian plant or to sleep at a hotel or a motel in order to just do the job that they want to do. So, Google it if you want all the details. Build Illinois. I'm not going to go into the weeds of it, but it's an awesome proposal that took many, many months of work to put together, and we're going to need to muster all of the energy in this room and in many other rooms in order to make it possible for places like Bloomington and Rockford to have the housing stock that they need to support the families that we all care about. Okay, that's my quick aside. I had to do it. It's a plug, and it's quite important. Oh, this microphone just fell right on top of me. Be careful if you're up here. All right. The last thing that I want to do before I scatter off is just to say thank you. I know some of you work on your local workforce development boards as volunteers or as staff. Some of you work in community colleges, or you help folks who are navigating unemployment or training in order to build the kind of life that we all want for the people that we know and care about. And I think there is no more important thing that you can do for an individual in their life than to help them find meaningful work. Our work, I'm Captain Obvious reporting for duty. Our work is something that gives our lives meaning. It's a huge part of how we think about ourselves, how we identify as human beings walking planet Earth. And so if you're ever in a moment where you feel like your work, your own vocation, your mission in the organization that you represent doesn't matter, or that, you know, what am I doing here? I want you to remind yourself, if you will, that the work that you do in a school or in a training program or in the unemployment arena is maybe the most essential work to giving meaning and purpose to the lives of the people that you touch. It's so very important. We all know that personally from our own experiences navigating the working world. And if you've sat across the table or on a sofa with somebody who's struggling to find their life's work, and you help them to bridge whatever gap they may be facing down, you know that what you're doing is a very, very special and important vocation. And I just want to say thank you, because it isn't just the individual who you're supporting in whatever program you may be working on that is impacted, but really there's a cascade of extraordinarily deep and enduring changes that happen in a person's life when they find meaningful work. That may be their children, that may be their spouse or their partner, it may be their parents or other loved ones that they're caring for. They're counting on them to find a life of meaningful work. And the commitment that each of you have made to making Illinois a more hospitable, more welcoming, and more successful place for matching up people who want a job and a career with the path that they'd like to pursue. The more you do, the more lives you touch, that you'll never see. You may never see the child of the individual who you helped to set on a path toward career success. And that child may never hold your hand and thank you for the work that you've done. But I'll tell you firsthand that it matters. I talked about last year, I think a little bit about my own parents. My parents were deaf from birth, and my parents, well into adulthood, could tell me the names of the VR counselors that supported them when they were navigating their post-secondary and post-high school employment journey. They struggled to find jobs that were meaningful in their lives. And thank goodness, thank the stars above that my dad did find meaningful work in his life and a job with benefits. But it took somebody looking him in the eye and seeing the value and seeing the promise that he had in his adult life, connecting him with a job opportunity that could feed our family and provide health benefits when we needed them most, in order to set my brother, my older brother, and me up for a life where we could be successful. And I never got to thank the vocational rehab counselors who supported my parents, but if I could, I would. So I feel that it's quite special and quite meaningful indeed to be in a room full of people who hold the hands of people navigating the employment journey and bringing them closer to success, because the lives that you're impacting will ripple across the state and the country and the world if luck has it. So I just want to say thanks. I so appreciate each of you, and I wish you all the best. I hope this is a great and fun and fulfilling conference, and I hope to see you in Springfield and around the state whenever we get a chance. So best wishes. Thanks a million.
Wow, absolutely fantastic. Let's hear it one more time for First Assistant Deputy Governor Ryan Croak. Probably my favorite thing about the summit is I always have a tough act to follow, so love it. My name is Andy Lasasso. I have the distinct honor and benefit of being the Chief of Staff for the Division of Rehabilitation Services housed at IDHS. And again, welcome to the 2026 Illinois Workforce Summit. I saw a lot of hands up. This is your first summit. Can we see those again? Oh, outstanding. Let's get a big hand. And for those that are attending virtually as well, if it's your first summit, thank you so much. Please give it your all. This is a large and complex ecosystem that we are in. So if you are new to your job and also new to the summit, talk to people, make new friends. You're going to see a lot of old friends mingling out here. Feel free to butt in, introduce yourself. I'd love to meet you. I know too many people in this room and they're tired of hearing from me. So I look forward to boring you. So I do have just a few housekeeping items that I want to go through for everyone's benefit, both here in the room and those that are attending virtually. Probably the best news is this is the largest summit so far. Oop. Deputy Governor? Usually it's a hook that comes in off the side of the stage, not a beep, so. Thank you, Ryan. This is our largest summit. 603 combined attendees, those in this room and those attending virtually. Every year we get a little bigger and a lot better, and it's because of the people that attend it. It's because of our presenters, it's because of the support we receive from the governor's office and from the core WIOA agencies that helped to put this thing together, and our partners at ISU within their Center for Specialized Professional Services that provide all the fancy stuff you see. So Thank you to my colleagues for helping to get this together. 600 plus strong. We actually had to cut off registrations because we hit fire code. So we're still safe. Everybody's still safe. And those attending virtually, I hope you're safe as well. So a few housekeeping items. So if you have not already downloaded and logged into the Whova app, please do so. It is super helpful, especially for those that are attending virtually. It allows you to participate in the conversations in the breakout sessions. If you have issues using the Whova app, please talk to somebody around you, make a new friend. But if that doesn't work, we have Amber down in the foyer, who is our Whova master or mistress, Whova guru, who will be able to help you. The summit theme for this year is empower, engage, and excel. So I think we're a pretty empowered group. We can always be better. But I want to emphasize on the engage. Make some new friends. Sit at a new table at lunch. Make some connections. I can vouch. These are some very, very good people, all naturally helpful. Because if you're not a natural, helpful person, you just don't last long in our business, right? I can see some shaking heads, nodding heads. Thank you. Looking down, so we were being very intentional about the schedule. You will be released before 1:30 p.m. tomorrow, okay? So please stick around through the whole thing. We have a full program with a lot of very meaningful awards being issued. So please remain and help us celebrate. And also want to make sure that if you want to put this out on your social media, please go to the Summit website. There is a press kit. You can post the banner onto your LinkedIn or whatever social media that you prefer. Please let people know that you're here. This event gets bigger and better every year because of the people that come. All right, I think I hit all the housekeeping items. I don't see any flashes from the back of the room. So it is my pleasure, and also with somewhat of a heavy heart, that we have a wonderful member of our team on the planning committee, Dr. Kathy Olison-Tracy. Let's give her a big round of applause. This will be her last official summit. We'll see if we can drag her back. But Kathy has been an absolute powerhouse, not only in the Summit Planning Committee, but in our workforce ecosystem. And Dr. Olison-Tracy, it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and I hope we can continue. So once again, for Dr. Tracy.
Good morning. I have the honor of introducing Nick Beadle, our speaker today, and I want to share a little bit about him. His experience spans the WIOA system, and he has something to offer for all of us, regardless of the entity and the agency you're working with. You're going to find his leadership and his voice recognizing the work that you do. Nick spent 11 years at the United States Department of Labor, where he last served as Chief of Staff for Workforce and Communications for Department of Labor's Good Job Initiative. In this role, Nick oversaw billions of dollars that DOL invests in workforce programs, and he led cross-department effort to improve the efficiency and outcomes of Department of Labor's workforce funding. Nick is also an expert on non-college pathways to good jobs, including skills-based hiring, on which he authored the Skills First Starter Kit. It's a best-in-class guide for employers, and this guide drew on his experience and expertise of a bipartisan group of expert organizations, including employer advocacy groups and labor unions. He has a great deal of experience in working across partner sectorships and as a bipartisan leader. Prior to his work with the Good Jobs Initiative, Nick developed a first-of-his-kind grant model using workforce dollars to battle the opioid crisis, later adapted by Congress in the Bipartisan Support Act. This addressed the substance abuse disorder epidemic. Before entering government, he was an award-winning investigative reporter covering the misuse of government funds and barriers to economic stability in the American South. He is a first-generation college student, originally from Green Hill, Alabama, and he's a graduate of the University of Alabama and the American University Washington College of Law. I think you're going to find his comments insightful impactful, and meaningful for the work that we do every day. So I would like to welcome Mr. Beadle.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm going to blame my contact not hearing Green Hill, Alabama, which I did not always, when I hear it out loud in these introductions, like, oh yeah, I've kind of come from a long way from here. But I appreciate being here with you guys this morning. Thank you, Kathy, for that lovely introduction. I'm thrilled to be joining you. And I greatly appreciate the state of Illinois and the organizers of this conference for bringing me here to chat with you this morning. And before we get started, similar to what Ryan did, I want to take a moment to thank those of you who are working in the workforce system, who are state and local workforce officials. This last year has really sucked. And this job, I mean, I don't know, there's no other way to say it. And this job is far too thankless anyways, and it is especially scary and thankless these days. So I want to thank you. You folks do a whole lot with a whole little, and the work we do would not work without you. And I've had the pleasure of spending the last year and change of traveling the country, getting to meet more of you who I did not meet at the Department of Labor, which is a failure on our part at the Department of Labor. And I learned so much when I'm in your company, and it is an extraordinary honor to share some of my expertise and my thoughts with you this morning, even if the road ahead is awfully frustrating. So I am still a lawyer, as you probably heard from the introduction, and unfortunately the venom of law school has not totally metabolized down my veins, so I have to give you a disclaimer or else I will not be able to function as a human. I will talk about law stuff today, but I am not providing legal advice. I'm a non-practicing attorney. My main legal advice is to get another lawyer who does practice. I'm going to talk about a lot of things very frankly today, but I am not trying to make a political point. I worked in 3 administrations for both parties, and a lot of my job these days is trying to make transparent and understandable a lot of what is happening in DC and a lot of what is happening in workforce policy. And I found when I talk frankly about it and clearly, people clearly understand what I'm talking about. So the last thing I will say is there is a ton of territory I'm going to cover today, and I tend to talk real fast despite this Southern accent. So if something slips by you, there will be time for questions at the end, and please ask. I'm happy to answer anything. All right, so you guys have a big couple of days ahead of you. It's a really interesting agenda that I looked at as I was coming into this, and you'll have a lot of important conversations about the future of workforce in Illinois. So that means it is time for me to make y'all as depressed as possible. So why do I say that? I've done a lot of talking around the country with people lately, and I get asked to lay everything out that is happening right now in the labor market and workforce policy in the United States. The feedback I've gotten, well, it's terrifying, frustrating, or just sad. Now, I'm not just putting this picture of a sad cat up here because I might think it's funny. I've actually worked with top depression scientists to kind of understand how to translate this moment for different types of adult learners in the room, which is a good workforce sort of idea. And what they have told me is that currently our conversations on workforce policy in the United States are what they like to call the sad kitten zone. But while that sadness, that anger, and that terror are all justified, and it's important to feel your emotions as a human, you all are among the people who I think have the tools and knowledge to get your chunk of workforce development in the United States through this particularly fraught and uncertain moment. So yes, this morning, what I'm going to start with is running through all the things that may take you deeper and deeper into that sad kitten zone. But I'm also going to tell you about some tools you have in your hands right now that Congress doesn't, and I'm going to give you some suggestions for moving ahead. Because the most important thing for people like you to be doing right now is being proactive, to carry the workers and employers of Illinois where they need to be next. Or, again, for our more visual learners, I want to take you from this sad kitten to this confident business genius kitten. So how am I going to do that? First, I'm going to tell you about where we are in workforce in the United States, including this unique moment of mass job loss. Then I'm going to tell you about where we are and aren't in DC on workforce policy and where we should go next and where we could go next. And then I will wrap by recommending how you start proceeding from here. and again, why this is a time for states like Illinois to lead. So this is frustrating material. I want to emphasize that again, just so you're aware. But the point is, I want you to know what's going out there so you can be proactive, so you can do your job better, and so we can all become confident business kittens. But for like workforce stuff. Okay, so with that first set of cat jokes out of the way, let's move into the potential cat jokes that I may or may not make to use to describe the current state of workforce in the United States. And I think it's important to situate where we are right now in the current labor market for the country as a whole. And where that is you may have heard of it as low hire, no fire. I tend to describe it as everyone hates it. And I've put some stats and details on board describing it. Now, for this crowd, I think there are a few things you need to take into account as to what might be feeding that low hire, no fire. And of course, the first is the robots. You've probably heard a lot of enthusiastic hype and dire warnings about AI and what it could do to the American worker. And I don't want to dismiss those. But right now, AI's utility in replacing humans is generally in the middle of the road at best. It's a power tool. It's a thing that makes the work that humans can do a little bit easier, a little bit crisper, and a little bit more predictable. It's not quite yet at replacing a human yet. But the real threat right now we're facing for a robot in terms of changing how we get people to work in this country isn't the robots themselves. It is the money supporting them. So the New York Times last fall published a piece that I think is incredibly insightful on this work, and it talks about how one reason that investors keep putting a lot of money into AI is they see an enticing premise in the idea of the robots taking all of our jobs. Robots theoretically don't cost as much as us people, and if your work is done by robots who don't cost as much as people, that leaves more of business's revenue over to be turned into profits. And investors, being investors, are eager to see greater profits. Now, I'm going to briefly offer some analysis here that there may be a tiny flaw in that sort of enthusiasm, and something the Times and other people have also pointed out, which is typically revenue comes from people, and people buying stuff, and people typically get the money they use to buy stuff from jobs. So if there are fewer people working jobs because of the robots, and there are fewer jobs, that means there's fewer revenue that can eventually turn into products. That seems bad for this particular moment. The good news for now, is that when companies are firing people because of AI, it may not really be because of AI. The folks at Lightcast have done some great research here in this point, and they found that many of the AI layoffs were actually most likely because of your typical economic reasons, not because terminators are marching through the hallways of your local accounting firm doing taxes with wild abandon. In other words, a lot of the AI job loss at this moment is probably just marketing, however unattractive it may be for those of us who are humans and like having jobs. And where there have been actual cuts for AI, there are a decent number of those jobs that are actually coming back after a bit because the robots are not quite there yet in terms of replacing people yet. And actually, there's an opportunity for humans to help the robots work better in the workplace, and I'll come back to that in a moment. Granted, AI has also been promised by our political and business leaders as something that can open up more jobs, including by flattening the learning curves it takes for getting people into new and better paying skilled labor. But right now, there aren't a lot of what you would call AI jobs, meaning jobs building AI. Rather, if you pay attention to where recent federal workforce funding is going, a lot of the AI jobs funding is going toward what's called AI infrastructure. And that's because it's the thing we can really grab hold on right now to throw funding at it. AI infrastructure jobs are jobs that are really just the traditional trades. Work for people like pipe fitters and electricians who are key to building data centers and the other infrastructure needed to power artificial intelligence. That is good for the trades, but it does appear that there is some room for AI jobs that are not just building AI, and they may not be in what you think. Again, Lightcast has some really helpful research here, and it shows that most of the current AI work is in what I like to call AI integration. That is, workers who can come in and diagnose how AI should be deployed in the workplace as a power tool for making the workplace a little bit more efficient and a little bit more cost efficient as well. That actually suggests a slightly more upbeat version of the future than what we've been talking about, where we can get investors to where they want to go without necessarily getting rid of all the jobs. And generally, firing everybody is not great. Instead, it also most likely gives room for people with different types of skill sets who may not have imagined themselves in a particular employer, in a particularly good job, being able to show up in places where they really could have, as I said, never imagined themselves. It also suggests that there may be a suite of skills that we can train workers on that are a little bit more durable than just training them on what technical skill is what employers are looking for this week. That's a good thing to train and build programs around. And the bad news is that as much as we're having these ambitious sort of talk about training workers for in society, that when we talk, policymakers and business leaders talk about it, we're really shooting too low. Much of it focuses on what's called AI literacy, a term that has meant everything from fundamentally understanding how AI works to, in the words of one CEO, writing better prompts into ChatGPT. To their credit, the Department of Labor, my former employer in this administration, recently did a lot of us in workforce a favor by creating a good, clear, and tangible framework for AI literacy. If you do want to spend training dollars toward AI literacy, I would suggest using this framework to tether that work to. With a little extra application and a little work, it's the type of thing that makes it easier to make sure funding is going the right direction. But again, the premise that I've seen, and based on what I'm seeing from the research, is integration, not just mere literacy, is really really what we need in the labor market right now. And there really isn't a good, clear framework in terms from tech or business or national policymakers for that integration, which, if we're expecting to get to those flattened learning curves and get more people into good jobs they may not ever imagine themselves in, isn't great. We need those sort of integration sort of frameworks. So now that I've covered the light topic of the robo-job apocalypse, let's talk about how employers are responding to this particular moment. As I've already told you, there's a lot of pressure from investors to make a big chunk of jobs go away for AI. But we're also hearing increasingly from employers that they don't like what they're seeing from America's talent pool. Now, I've been in workforce for more than a decade now, and the entire time I've been in it, employers have never been shy about saying that exact thing. But right now it feels a little bit more urgent and a little bit more pronounced, probably because we are in this transition point. Manufacturers, for example, have complained about struggles filling hundreds of thousands of open jobs for nearly 2 decades now, based on my research. That estimate has been as high as 600,000 open jobs based on their surveys. And last year, one manufacturing industry official said it may take them as much as 4 years to skill somebody for some of the open jobs they have now. Blessedly, we're now just in 400,000 open jobs based on recent research. At the same time that is happening in this particular industry, whiter collar employers have increasingly voiced their disdain with what they see out of recent college graduates, who tend to cost more to hire, but still need a lot of training just to be able to come into the workplace and do their job well, because they don't necessarily learn that in college. That dissatisfaction, though, really hasn't manifested in a change in how employers hire on the large in this country. We're a bit more of a decade into a national effort to strip away degree requirements and hire people based on skills verified during the hiring process. Skills-based hiring, as you might know it, or skills-first hiring, which is another term for it. Of all the companies that have stripped away degree requirements, only a microscopic portion of them have hired people without degrees. And as you can tell from the stat on the board, just a little more than a third have actually meaningfully changed their hiring processes after removing those degree requirements. So we're also nearly 2 decades into a political and policy brace of apprenticeship, which I'm sure you guys have heard a lot about. Apprenticeship could be a great alternative to college degree to get people into those whiter collar occupations, as well as it's a great thing we know for getting people into the traditional trades, and we need more people in the traditional trades right now. Yet, apprenticeship still makes up 0.3% of the workers in this country. New apprenticeship enrollment actually dipped last year for the first time since the COVID-19 pandemic, according to some data released by DOL. That's not exactly good news for the latest national effort for building up apprenticeship. As you might know, last year the president said he wanted to expand apprenticeship in the United States to 1 million apprentices, meaning 1 million active registered apprentices. It's worth noting here as a brief aside that I think something that has actually come out of this 1 million effort so far, whatever you think of it, is that it's unintentionally highlighted a key flaw in how we've been thinking about expanding apprenticeship in the United States. The administration's main focus has been on expanding the number of apprenticeship programs, which is an obvious thing and a good thing for us as a country because we need more programs to have more apprentices. However, However, newer programs, just based on how employers hire when they're doing something new, don't actually add scores upon scores of apprentices. They add one, they add maybe two, and they grow gradually over time. Last week, DOL noted that 3,300 new programs have been registered since the start of the Trump administration. If you assume one apprentice for each of those programs, you get 3,300 apprentices, just some very basic math. DOL needs 300,000 apprentices to get to the 1 million number by the end of this term. You might also have heard that DOL has spent quite a lot on apprenticeship pay-per-performance incentives, which I call pay to train, just for simplicity's sake, meaning because you are paying employers to train people a certain way and get them to a certain point. By June 30th of this year, DOL have invested close to $250 million into these incentives within 1 year alone. I think it's far too early to grade these efforts, mainly because a big chunk of these funds haven't actually been even awarded yet to the people who will be meting them out. But I will say that at the start of this year, when some of these funds were announced, employers were extraordinarily excited and they were shooting for the moon for this. After the funding opportunity for this money came out, things got considerably more downbeat. Why is that happening? Well, one, there's a belief that getting access to money is still too complicated. And they're also concerned that the amount of money is not worth it because it's $6,000 up against a potentially $100,000 of new overhead. There is also just some exhaustion going on from employers right now on apprenticeship. They have been sold apprenticeship as the solution to all their problems for the better part of 2 decades, and I'll be quite frank from talking to a lot of employers in the last year, some of them just don't want to do apprenticeship even if they think even if it might be a good fit for their business because they're just kind of tired of it. We also have a big problem in apprenticeship growth that I will say right now in DC seems off the table, which is a problem. Something in apprenticeship does not seem to work for women workers. And when I played with the stats last summer, women's apprenticeship participation rates, meaning the number of women in participating as apprentices in certain fields, actually noticeably falls behind women's participation in those fields, including in male-dominated occupations. Usually the explanation for this has been that apprenticeship doesn't work for women because it's traditionally in male-dominated occupations. But something is off there because women are doing better in those occupations just in normal jobs as opposed to just in apprenticeship. Women make up a narrow majority of the American population. They're half of the American workforce. And as of March data from DOL, the seasonally adjusted labor participation rate for women was 57.1%. But per DOL's apprenticeship data, only 13.7% of registered apprentices are women right now. And female enrollments, just like apprenticeship enrollments overall, dropped last year for the first time since the pandemic. Now, as you can tell from this accent, I did not acquire it from the Upper East Side of New York City. I am but only a simple country national workforce expert. I don't claim to be some highfalutin big city mathematician, but it does strike me that if we want to really grow apprenticeship and grow it fast, we probably ought to diagnose and attack why women's participation rate in apprenticeship is 43.4% lower than their workforce participation rate as a country. Seems like it might be key to the whole situation. And I will also add, while this is definitely not a moment to talk about diversity initiatives, the thing we found while we were working on similar ideas in the Good Jobs Initiative was that where women tend to have greater access, so do a lot of men who don't have access for reasons that are typically off the radar. Your working mom, what helps them tends to help your working dad too. Or, to summarize this speech's lighthearted and breezy passage about things that are highly depressing in the American Labor Department, we know we need to change how we hire and train people in this country. And even if AI doesn't eliminate most of America's jobs, it's likely to fundamentally change them and the skills workers need to get jobs. Employers just aren't adopting the changes to hiring that they ought to, even though that we've been pushing a couple of good ideas on them for a couple decades, and there may be some key flaws in how we are trying to promote those ideas. So now that I've showed you some stats, or showed you some information on the state of the labor market, let's talk about the status of our tools to solve those workforce challenges. Now, just as a show of hands, how many people in this crowd have found themselves working with or highly reliant on any federal money? Okay, how many of y'all are just federal workforce dollars? I see 2 hands up here, good Lord. Okay, so on screen, I have put together a highly technical analysis, very complex, of what 2025 likely felt like for you guys. So yeah, last year wasn't great. I like to summarize 2025 as a surplus of far too many potential apocalypses for workforce funding in the United States. On screen now is a list of things just the list of things I could fit on one slide reasonably that people in workforce funding went through last year that could have been potential threats to their dollars. Now, I'm not going to walk through all of these because the point is, dang, that's a lot of things to happen in 1 year. So if you're tired and everything feels chaotic, it's because everything is exhausting and everything really is chaotic right now. So before we move on with talking about more of what's happening in DC, I'm going to answer the question I get asked the most right now. If you work with WIOA, your WIOA money is not going away. Absent a dramatic shift in Congress, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, despite all its many flaws and interesting eccentricities, is probably going to stay in place for at least another couple of years. There is an effort to reauthorize WIOA right now. It's live in the House of Representatives, but that may not clear that chamber, and it will not clear the Senate, even though it may very well come close. And even if it does clear Congress, I'm not sure that the current White House would sign off on WIOA reauthorization because it has asked for significant and major budget cuts to workforce development. So nothing is changing. It just may have a giant flaming sword dangling over it every year for the next 3 years. No big deal. More in a moment. Similarly, while the education programs, as you know, have moved across the mall to the from the Education Department to the Department of Labor, particularly for CTE, many of those programs' recent funding solicitations tell us that they're largely operating as they always have. They just have a different address. So, and I will also say that from a technical and legal perspective, as someone who used to work out interagency working agreements, like the one governing the relationship between ED and DOL right now, there very much still is a Department of Education. Those changes can be probably pulled back very quickly if a lawsuit happens or something goes awry. And they will most likely not be made permanent in this coming Congress. I will also say that a big push of these, the big sort of justification for those mergers probably is also likely off the table. There was some talk about trying to align these programs and do things that we have the ED programs working with the DOL programs, the DOL work programs working with the ED programs, and we can get more results out of it. Legally and functionally, that's pretty much impossible because of the same thing I've talked about. There's key rules in terms of how Congress tells us to spend money. That means we can't actually make those changes and spend money on Job Corps, on career and technical education, or career and technical education money on Youth Build. That kind of thinking is, there is some issues here too, because the status quo right now in terms of this funding isn't exactly great. Now, I'm not going to presume to be an expert in what's happening in Illinois. I don't live here. I'm happy to be a visitor with you today. But what I will say, based on things like Build, based on things like CEJA, based on all the other sort of things that are going on, I do think you have shown real promise in putting your own money into workforce development, which we need more of, because ultimately what we are seeing is WIOA is very limited in what it can do in ways that aren't necessarily great for employers or workers. The core programming of WIOA, the things Congress has told says by statute we have to do with that money, means it doesn't perform well in the areas it really ought to. My explanation in talking about how WIOA works and how it's designed to do is that it doesn't prioritize job outcomes so much as moving as many bodies and as much paper as possible through a system as quickly and cheaply as possible. It costs providers way too much time and money to track performance metrics that I do know some states, including states closely allied with the people who invented the performance metrics, those states are starting to build their own metrics because they've heard from employers and their own work that the WIOA performance indicators just really don't help them and tell them anything about how well they're doing. That metrics and cheapness, unfortunately, usually routes workers into the first job available, which is not always the best job available. And as you will see from the slide, the Harvard Project on Workforce found that nearly half of WIOA's participants end up in jobs that pay less than $25,000 a year and don't really offer much in terms of upper growth. That approach is inefficient. And it's not just bad for workers, it's a bad use of the resources that Congress gives us for workforce development, which are far too little. Something else we noticed while working on good jobs in the prior administration was that aiming workers toward a good job was kind of like the missing piece of WIOA that we never knew wasn't there. If a worker ends up in a job that treats and pays them well enough for them to stick in that job long term, they're less likely to need another job, which means they're less likely to come back to the workforce system, come back to entitlement programs to ask for money, more money in the future. So if we improve job outcomes, we tend to improve the quality of the spending, but the spending tends to be pointed toward lesser job outcomes. Now, getting someone in a good job necessitates actually getting them to that good job. And when I talk to people around the country about workforce development, the one thing they always flag at one point or another is it's not training and training availability that's keeping people out of jobs. It's the fact that someone can't find someone to take care of their kids, or get a ride, or get a place to stay. WIOA makes this unnecessarily difficult to address. For programs for adults and dislocated workers, and I'm sure all of the folks who know who work with WIOA, WIOA says that you have to show those workers can't get those services elsewhere before WIOA dollars can be used on them. For some workforce areas, that means referrals to services that may not actually exist, and ultimately ends up finding the help that's essential to someone getting the training into a scavenger hunt for a worker where they have to prove a negative. And if they do get that money, because the WIOA money tends to be so small, they tend to get very small vouchers that may not actually address their need, which means we are losing good workers who, for reasons not related to their skills, that can fill jobs employers need filling. Now, there's an interesting sidebar I want to add here for you that may infuriate some of you, I'll totally tell you, that I think is really key to understand the disconnect that we're having in the policy conversation in Washington right now. As I wrote about this on my newsletter a lot last spring, there was a moment where there were some Hill staffers who were talking, perhaps a little too freely, about how they thought that the real fix for WIOA was to train a different population than we were training right now. And what population would that be? That would be workers who are middle to upper class who are might lose their jobs due to AI. They had observed rightly that a lot of WIOA legislates particular programs into a phone booth, that you can only serve a very particular type of person who tends to be lower income, have a lot of skill needs, and really need a whole lot more time and money than WIOA tends to offer, because WIOA is about moving people as quickly and cheaply through things as possible. That doesn't really sync up. Now, my understanding, though, wasn't they were thinking through that problem. My understanding was they were thinking about how do we make these stats look better? Because they had believed that these workers who may lose their jobs from AI wouldn't need all this help and all these services. They could fit the cheap and fast sort of way of doing things. So they would bounce right back. And as they put it, hey, if someone, already has a house and all these other things, they may not actually need supportive services. One, I think that misunderstands what the effects of a mass job loss event of the type that's being talked about with AI would actually look like. And I also think it misunderstands how a lot of people live in this country, because as we were talking about, and as Ryan was talking about, it costs a lot to live a life in America right now. The other thing it highlighted to me that I hadn't considered, but I've been thinking about almost daily since then, is not only do we have one population that we are not necessarily serving well with WIOA, we soon could have two. And that second population, those workers displaced by AI, might not qualify for the programs at all because they've been earning too much money, or they don't have a lot of skill needs. They have skills, the skills just labor market doesn't want anymore. And we don't know the full scope of their needs, but they could be significant. And we don't actually have money to serve them right now because we don't have enough money to serve one population well right now. I told y'all this would be depressing. Here's a picture of a puppy. Now, this picture, a puppy interlude, is key because the next section is going to highlight to you not only is that policy conversation in DC suffering from a dramatic relatability gap from what American workers and employers face, but it's also a conversation that is really kind of on a different planet. Because the debate I'm hearing in Washington right now is how to bolt down the current status quo. That's option one. Or the option two is how to cut the living heck out of the workforce dollars we spend now. And there isn't even agreement among the people who are wanting to cut the workforce dollars on how precisely to do it. I swear there will be another picture of a puppy. But to get to there, I want to walk you through one policy proposal that's on a very persnickety or very incongruent journey. A year ago, you may have heard the White House proposed what's called the Make America Skilled Again block grant program, or also called MASA. Now, there's a misconception that this program would just be a merger of existing workforce programs into one block grant on a state-by-state basis, but I can tell you from a technical perspective, as someone who lawyered these programs, it's something different. It actually would eliminate almost all of the Department of Labor's workforce programs, the veteran, for a couple of veterans programs and one disability program, and it would replace them with a significantly smaller block grant, around around 25% less money than states are getting now. And states would then be asked to figure out how to do workforce in their state, which is not a bad thing, but they'd be asked to do it with significantly less money with potentially greater need because it eliminates programs like CSEP and Youth Build and Job Corps and a whole other host of programs. That proposal, to my surprise, given the relationship between the White House and Congress right now, didn't actually go anywhere on the Hill. 3 months later, 3 agencies, my former employer, the Department of Labor, the Department of Education, and the Department of Commerce, published a document that I sometimes call the Trump Workforce Blueprint, but you may know as America's Talent Strategy. This document, as I understand it, was largely built from the leaders at those agencies. There was some White House involvement, obviously, but it was sort of a different sort of approach to doing things. And it also included a vision for MASA, but it was one that was a little bit different in some subtle but notable ways. And I say subtle, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, because it talked about eliminating all the workforce grants at 3 agencies, not just one, and then blobbing them all together into one block grant that I presume would also be state by state. These grants would be awarded by DOL, and DOL somehow could claw back the money if specific projects awarded underneath it didn't hit certain marks at around 1 year, and then it would be redistributed to the other awardees who got that. Functionally, legally, conceptually, that's kind of inconsistent, and I will also say that just in terms of how we distribute money through appropriations from Congress, that's also fairly impossible, and it would require some dramatic changes in terms of how that money is awarded and some specific permissions that I'm not sure Congress is likely to give. That proposal didn't go anywhere either in Congress. So last month, the White House brought back the Massive Block Grant proposal, which largely ignores a lot of the stuff that was in the talent strategy blueprint. This time with just a hair more money than the 25% cut from last year. Literally within the same week, House Republicans proposed their own version of the Massive Block Grant program that doesn't match any of these. It would be a version of what's called sort of the one-door single state system, similar to what's happening in Utah. I won't go in the details of that. I'm happy to answer questions about this at the end. But what I will say is it's yet another different version of this one grant program. And as was noted in the room during the markup on that bill, which I happen to be at, the White House's budget proposal actually would have defunded this particular approach. Here's 2 puppies. I'm not saying all this to be persnickety, nor am I trying to make a political point. What I'm trying to get at right now is it's really hard to get a consistent signal from the top. And that's really important for any policy work, but especially for a system as diffuse and spread out as workforce development in the United States. Agency leaders, I can tell you, most likely don't know what they should be working on. And I'm pretty sure the people on the ground, when you hear these signals from Washington, don't know what you should be doing either. It's really hard to create good and consistent programs and attract good partners if you don't know what the shape of the world will be next week. So the fact that we don't have a consistent vision, even for what this one program, which may be devastating for some states, would look like, that's not great. Again, there's a puppy. Now, I do think there are some interesting options being offered by the administration right now. Once you scratch past the residue of the idea of destroying everything, DOL right now is inviting states to waive big chunks of WIOA based on the premise that if you do less WIOA, you can do more WIOA better. Their uptake in getting those waivers or getting requests for those waivers has actually been slower than I think the administration had hoped. They've issued a few more guidance documents than I think might have been intended at the start. And I also think their sales pitch has not necessarily gone over well because some of it, including the room I was in back at the start of March, has been read as DOL and the Trump administration blaming workforce officials for problems that really should be at the feet of Congress. There's also uncertainty here too. One thing I've been told to look for is based on some adjustments to how the state and local workforce boards are composed, something that DOL has carved out, may create some legal vulnerabilities that there's an expectation from some corners that there will eventually be a lawsuit that could shut down the entire waiver process. That does make it a dicier prospect, but I will say that I think it's an interesting enough one to explore and have conversations about right now, just based on the energy and the need to try to do something, because this is really maybe the Trump administration's last best shot at significantly changing how WIOA works. Now, One last thing I'll cover here before we get out of this section and we start to wind things down is that I imagine you have a lot of questions about Workforce Pell. I think Workforce Pell has a lot of questions about Workforce Pell right now. As you may know, just to bring together everybody on a level set, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act opened up workforce programs to access Pell Grant funds available for lower income students, but only for those at basically colleges, accredited institutions. There are very strict and very strong requirements meant to maintain quality that to qualify for the money, your program has to show a certain level of hiring rates, payment, as well as a completion. Now, that is a very difficult thing to accomplish, but I will say that has not necessarily leveled out members of Congress in terms of how much they are expecting Workforce Pell to fix all the problems in the United States. Now, right now, I'm going to put a list on the board. It is not a confirmed list, but this is just a list of things that, based on what the information I've gathered, I understand members of Congress might think Workforce Pell can be the universal fix for. I'm being cheeky here, but I promise I'm being cheeky in the service of a point. States are struggling right now with Workforce Pell because it has a ton of unfunded mandates. It requires creating systems for data and other things that many of them don't necessarily have. It also requires getting parts of colleges and state government in alignment that just aren't normally there and there never has really been an incentive to do it for a amount of money that may not necessarily be a whole lot at the end of the day. Now, I do think Workforce Pell is going to be a critical tool for us. I think it's going to open up opportunities we have not happened before. But really what we need right now is fewer conversations about quality, which has been a lot of what's coming out of DC and especially in Congress right now. Everyone thinks these programs should be quality, and I'm 100% believer in creating only funding quality workforce programs. But I do think what we need right now more than anything is good bureaucracy. Now, the word bureaucracy does not have to suck, despite what you might hear otherwise. And I have spent a lot of my professional life trying to build systems that touch all those bases in the laws, but still get money out to the people that need it as quickly, smoothly, and smartly as possible. Bureaucracy, if engineered well, can be smart, quick, and good. And we are going through a key bureaucratic exercise right now, and that's what Workforce Pell really should be about right now. We need swift, straight lines from academic departments to governor's offices who are going to be in charge with figuring a lot of different things out and then submitting that information on each program to the Department of Education to get qualification and approval. That, of course, is easier said than done. And I've heard of situations where politics being politics, as they are everywhere, mean that states are trying to do things like get entire community college catalogs Workforce Pell eligible. I would advise against that, mainly because that's what the law is literally built not to do, based on those hiring rates and the other things along those lines. But I do think there is upside in Workforce Pell, and I do think it's also going to have a slow start. What I'm going to tell you to do and recommend right now is you be patient with it. Don't expect it to fix everything, including 7th grade and piracy. Expect it instead to be something you have to figure out and have to build good bureaucratic systems to both maintain that quality and actually get the programs funded. Also, here's one last puppy. Those are my favorite. So, I've thrown a lot of depressing things at you. I hope that part has been proven. I try to do what I say. And I've taken you deep down into that sad kitty zone. But for now, let's talk about you and how there are answers to some of these problems that you can deploy, and you may be the only people who can deploy them, and why you should do it now. Let me clear about what I'm not going to tell you. I'm not going to tell you that because the national and political environment or policy environment is so hard to follow and dysfunctional and toxic in some ways that you guys got to take the wheel because no one else will. Nor am I throwing at you an expectation that you guys have to come up with one brand spanking brilliant idea because we really, really need it right now. What I am asking you to do is take advantage of strengths you guys have that no one in DC who makes policy on this really has right now, which is that you guys actually live here. The people who we are serving, the workers we are serving, the employers we're serving, the faces of people like that aren't just conceptual to you like they are in Washington. They're your friends, they're your family, they're your neighbors, they're people you love. You know what those people need because you can have a conversation with them. That's a benefit that Congress and the administration and anybody else in DC really doesn't have. So what I want you to do is this. Take that strength, get to understand what those people need right now on the employer and the worker side, and figure out one to two things you can do in the immediate future that helps make their lives easier. That means getting workers into better jobs and getting more workers into jobs that employers need filling. What I would say is that if the current system doesn't fit, do think about those WIOA waivers and see if one of them may help you do it. That sort of localized approach is, if you listen to Congress, how this stuff has always been meant to work. In Illinois, where I do know your state leaders are very invested in workforce development, as Ryan talked about just before me, I do think you guys have an advantage, an opportunity, and some momentum to do something better. I will also say that the thing I'm hearing from Washington more than anything right now is we want to defer to states and we want to defer to local government to help figure out these problems. So I would say make them put their money where their mouth is. Get that deference, take advantage of it, because in this moment, because there is that chaos and dysfunction, good ideas can rise to the top very quickly and become national models. I will also add, just as a pro tip for anyone who tries to compete for federal dollars, that if you do have your work together and you do know where you want to go and you have everything organized, that puts you in a vastly better position to get federal funds because you have your stuff together. You're not just creating a project that's being cooked just to get the money. So I'm a visitor, like I said, and I'm not just going to assume all the issues everyone here in Illinois is facing, folks here in Peoria to the folks in Rockford. What I'm not going to assume what you're facing exactly, but what I am going to do is make a few recommendations to you based on what I'm seeing nationally, based on problems and issues that other states and everyone else is facing. The first thing I'm going to recommend to you is that WIOA is very diverse, and that's very overwhelming both for workers, but also employers, and quite frankly, the people who administer the system. As much as you can create a simple menu of products that tells employers and workers what they get out of particular programs, the better you're likely to be. The more likely you're going to attract workers and employers to work with those programs, and the more likely you're going to get better results from those programs. So as much as you can come up with that simple menu, I would recommend it. I know this is typically where someone talks about in workforce the ETPL, but when I started looking in that box for this speech, I heard hissing and claw sounds, and I decided not to look at it. I could talk about that later. What I also will say is that you need to invest in supportive services as much as you possibly can. If a worker doesn't have access to care, safe, stable care for the people they love the most, if they can't get to the training or if they don't have a place to live, they're not going to get or keep a good job. That's just reality. WIOA makes this too hard, and too often the answer for WIOA is to send workers on that scavenger hunt I talked about earlier. One thing I have been trying to do in this area in particular, based on some things I saw in DOL, because I do know these stereo instructions really well as a lawyer, is try to figure out how to make that process better. And last year, I set out for several months and researched and found that WIOA, the black and white law, black letter law, doesn't actually require that scavenger hunt. It may be different from what you've heard. WIOA instead offers more tools available for workforce boards to both proactively prove that it doesn't make sense to send someone to services that don't exist, and go ahead and get them money from WIOA, but it also allows you guys to do creative things that can be cost controlled so you're getting more money out of those dollars. Things like contracting with the child care center provides a certain number of slots for the participants in your programs. Or, as crazy as it may sound, buying a van for your local workforce area that drives people to their training if they need a ride. And I'll actually say there's current DOL workforce guidance that strongly encourages the purchase of vehicles with DOL's approval to help create access to workforce services, which this very much is. And you can read that paper where I've also set up several different tools for helping implement these ideas by scanning the QR code on the screen. I'll keep that up for a second while you guys are there, but I will also say the last thing I will tell you is this. Every job can be a good job, and it doesn't make sense to route federal workforce dollars to anything less than a good job. Because as I said, if a job pays a worker well enough to keep them in that job and treats them well enough, then they're less likely to need federal assistance in the future. It doesn't necessarily take a gold-plated cubicle or a Cadillac health plan to create a good job, though. It takes small steps. and a few of them are on the screen. The thing I have found in my work is that a lot of employers have the tools to create good jobs. They just don't always know it, and they just don't always know how to use them. And if anybody is going to be able to help fill that gap and make that a little bit more widely spread, it's the federal workforce system. I'm also going to put a QR code that has some more tools for that on the screen. I apologize, it is a part of the paid section of my website, so if you want to scan that, you can also do that as well. The last thing I want to remind you is this. I want you to believe in yourself. You guys are the experts here. You guys are the real leaders in the workforce system. I truly believe you in these local workforce ecosystems are going to lead us in the way for the future through this moment of uncertainty. You guys may well do it also without any interference that I think a lot of people are afraid right now because there is so much deference to the state and local level. Perhaps more than any other time, this is your moment. There are plenty of things nationally to get discouraged about. But I think, you know who really believes in themselves? Business Kitty. And I believe you all can be business kittens. Thank y'all. I'll now take questions. Support service, yes, I can do that. All right.
No, I don't see it.
Is it on? Hey. Hi. You said in one of the slides it said that it's like it's
we're gonna have to,
a
like, stand
recommendation
back
that
here.
apprenticeship work, but they're just not being
Right.
scaled and adopted. Do you think that the root of that is because, you know, as employers, they're not incentivized to provide or hire someone who needs these kinds of services? They just kind of want someone there quickly. And how do you consolidate that to get through to actually scale it?
I will say it's a complicated issue, but I will say there are two things that are standing out, which is one, there are a lot of needs when you're talking about lower income workers that we do need better access to supportive services. And that's where a lot of the apprenticeship money ultimately gets spent. And it's been one of the things I don't necessarily love about current DOL spending is that it de-emphasizes that supportive services spending. Because there may be a gap, because registered apprenticeship starts you out at a minimum wage, or it can start you out at a minimum wage. You may still need help for a certain time before you get to a wage that you can be on your own. So we do need that help. The other thing I will say too, that I have spent a lot of the last year talking to employers and other employer groups about their issues in apprenticeship, and I do think there is some fundamental misunderstanding that we need to sell. And I will say on knowledge here, in terms of new programs, yes, we need to speed up the process. Yes, we need to be easier. That's where a lot of the effort is going. But I have talked to employers who basically told me they think apprentices are half an employee. That's not necessarily the point of an apprentice. The point of an apprentice is bringing in someone to do the job and keep getting better at the job so you're getting more out of them over time. So there's a real misunderstanding from some employers in terms of what an apprentice actually does. And I think we need to do that type of sales job as well as also let people know where those apprenticeship opportunities exist, because a lot of people can't tell you where someone should apply for an apprenticeship.
There's one over there.
Hi. So I'm just curious. So we are looking at systems across the board that are standardizing. I'm going to say something. I'm sorry, everybody in the room. IWATS 2.0, right? So we are rolling over into, I'm so sorry. We are rolling over into a new system. And at the same time, we have to do exactly what you're asking us to do, which is to look at each individual person to see how we best serve them. So my question is, how do we standardize systems, but also look at individuality to have the macro and the micro at the same time?
I think it is, I'll give you the same answer, which is be simple and be human. By be simple, I mean do not try to account for every possible granular detail that you need at the same time. And I have seen some systems that go so far in depth, they're not actually even usable, even if you think you're getting a lot of good data for it. So I think figure out what you actually need within the tools you have, and then also figure out what it is to be human. Because the more you spend time trying to get people to document everything, the more likely you're going to scare that person off. And also, really you should be focusing on the things that are really human about them and help you get better results so you know how to serve that person better individually.
This is Renee Patrick. I'm the Title IV director here in Illinois. And Jane Elizabeth probably says hello to you. Anywho's, I was curious if, in terms of your crystal ball, where are we going? Are we going to ACL, or to HHS, or are we going to DOL in terms of the VR OSERS agency? Because you spoke about this sort of confusion up there, and you must have friends that whisper to you.
I will answer all those acronyms with another acronym, which is TBD. Which is, and I will say very, without getting into a lot of certain detail and be very careful here in terms of what I can talk about as a former DOL employee, what I can say is that an issue here is that Congress really only lets you, and the Constitution only really lets you move certain services so far. And that's a real challenge right now, is because you may be able to run into certain sort of walls in terms of what functions you can move outside a particular building or not. So that is very interesting, and it's been very challenging because DOL essentially is they're a contractor, the Department of Education right now. They're hiring them as a vendor to run their own programs because they can somehow do them better. And the first sort of document that did to do that was better than the second, because the first one had that full theory. The second one was very clearly, oh dang it, we can bring this program but not this program. We can bring this program but not this program. And they're sort of picking it out. So it is down to a very granular level. So I can't tell you necessarily where everything is going to move. I just know that there is definitely an interest in doing it. And if it doesn't seem like there's an answer yet, there may not actually be an answer yet. As comforting as that is. Did I answer your question? Because I don't think I did, but I don't think I necessarily haven't answered your question, nor do I think the people who could answer your question haven't answered your question right now.
We have time for one more. Okay, looks like. Last one.
So I do business engagement. I've noticed a shift this year on the apprentice model when I'm trying to do partnerships with corporations. They have now said that they are scuttling their adult apprenticeship recruitment and are focusing more on going straight to high schools and doing their apprenticeship recruitment. It's concerning to me because most of the people I serve are not in high school. But I also wonder, when you bring up the case study of how low women participation is, if you were to get them younger out of high school, would that perhaps down the road increase engagement? I wonder why suddenly a lot of Fortune 500 companies are starting to say, no, we're directing all of our money and all of our funding to recruit at the high school level.
It is, I'll tell you that last part first, which is it's a very spreadsheet way of thinking, and there are very good things with thinking like a spreadsheet sometimes, but the idea is we get someone younger, we could probably start them out at a pretty decent salary because they don't have, pretty affordable salary because they don't have as many needs yet. And we can keep them even longer and perhaps, create a loyalty there because we did hire them out of high school. The challenge is, as I imagine a lot of people who've worked with youth found out, is they are young people and they are still growing and they are still figuring things out. So actually, I get the big push to try to push apprenticeship at that age, but I also think that you shouldn't just focus all your eggs in that one basket because people change and you may not actually keep that. And that's what I hear about from employers. It's like, we hired someone really young and then they decided they want to go be an architect or something. Not to cast doubt on architecture. What I will say here is, there's the population of apprentices, and something that I think a lot of policymakers in DC don't like, but we should really embrace as a country, is your usual age for an apprentice is in the late 20s, early 30s, even up to the 40s. And that's not a bad thing, and maybe an even better thing if we have to retrain people who lose their jobs because of AI. Mainly because those people no longer are in that sort of growing period. They know what they want to do. And when I talk to community colleges, I call this the golden population, that there's that population of people who are working in jobs that they really just cannot get over the living wage gap, but then they decided, I want to be an electrician because I know what that lifestyle looks like. I've done my work, I know where it is, and I want to be that person. And they blow through college, they get a job, and they end up performing exceedingly well. So I think we need to be thinking in terms of that. At the same time, we're trying to create those opportunities, but acknowledge young people are young people, and young people are unpredictable. All right, I think that was my last one. Thank you guys for everything. This is a pleasure. I'm also going to shout out my people from Rockford. My father-in-law, Carl, is a proud Rockford U grad, swam for y'all in the 80s, so shout out Rockford. All right, thank y'all.
All right, one more time for Nick Beadle. That was awesome. All right, so as we transition, I know a lot of us are going to be very tempted to check our email. So I want us all to take a page from Nick's book. No sad kitty when you check your email, right? All business kitty, okay? Right? Be strong in that inbox. I know we're all away from our normal duties, so thank you for your time here today. Before we release everyone to the breakout sessions, please note that we will be back here for lunch at 12:15. And the afternoon will include breakout sessions and a very engaging plenary session on what's next for Illinois workforce with insights from our state leaders, and that is at 2:30. Thank you all. Please enjoy today. Please enjoy the summit.